My next patron question is from Andrew, who wants to know about a fictional scenario involving an unlikely film adaptation. Bill Watterson's Calvin and Hobbes is one of the most beloved comic strips of all time, and of its popularity came a natural demand for merchandising and possible TV or movie adaptations. However, Watterson was strongly opposed to the strip being commercialized and refused any offers he received. Even if it's best to leave the strip alone, and as it is, it's still intriguing to wonder how it would translate into a movie adaptation that is respectful and faithful to the humor and tone Watterson established for the strip's world and characters, but it also works as a movie on its own terms. If there were any director who I think could properly adapt the strip to film, it's Richard Linklater, who's known for specializing in philosophical undertones and juvenile humor, which are two predominant features of Watterson's strip. What do you think? Could Linklater direct a good Calvin and Hobbes movie? Out of respect for Watterson's wishes, I'm not saying this should happen and only proposing this as a what-if scenario. Like Andrew said, Calvin and Hobbes has never been adapted for the screen, with Bill Watterson providing several reasons why he has no interest in doing that. His reasoning mostly comes from a sense of being content with the characters only coming from his pencil and wanting to preserve some magic for the reader. He's even famously not allowed merchandise, even though Hobbes plushies would probably be big sellers. But again, his reason is that he does not want to take away from the experience of the reader. As a creator who still retains control over his characters, Watterson is completely in his right to license them in whatever way he wishes. But let's say in this fantasy scenario, Richard Linklater was given permission to make a film adaptation of Calvin and Hobbes. While he has directed 3 films using rotoscoping techniques, I assume it will be made in live action. A young blonde-haired boy will be cast as Calvin, and to bring Hobbes to life, computer-generated animation will be used, probably in the vein of something like Paddington or Ted. Now, when I think of Linklater's directing approach, casual and breezy are the adjectives that come to mind, and I mean that as a compliment. A significant number of his films mostly involve the characters just living their lives and starting conversations about whatever crosses their mind. There is the occasional drama that occurs, but most of his movies take place in the real world with people dealing with what comes to them, and what they deal with are often regular, everyday events. The Before trilogy, for example, mostly involves the 2 lead characters meeting up and just talking about their lives and what they want to do as they walk through the city they're currently in. I find with Linklater's movies, if you want to spend time with his characters, then the film works, or sometimes even the opposite. Most of the characters in Dazed and Confused are people I would very likely try to avoid in real life, and a lot of what they do is not particularly appealing to me personally. And yet, despite that, the conversations they have and the problems they face are interesting. I think a major reason why the Calvin and Hobbes strips seem to appeal to a lot of people is because of the philosophical discussions that Calvin and Hobbes have, or even the things that Calvin says to his parents. Watterson himself described Calvin as having not much of a filter between his brain and his mouth, and he seems to spout out any sort of thought that crosses his mind. So I think that's another reason he seemed to appeal to children in particular. Linklater himself has directed quite a few films with child protagonists that follow a similar idea. School of Rock is the most well-known one, with Jack Black helping the children find their voice. There was also Boyhood, with a good chunk focusing on its lead character's young boy viewing the world through his own lens and reacting to the complications in his and his family's life. Additionally, Richard Linklater directed the Bad News Bears remake, though the script for that was basically 99% the original film from the 70s. Nonetheless, that too was centered on children with pretty much no filter. Thinking about all this, it makes sense why Andrew would suggest Linklater as a candidate to direct a Calvin and Hobbes movie, and he would probably respect Watterson's intent and honor it with his directing and writing style, or maybe even have Watterson himself write the screenplay. Really, the best way to bring Calvin and Hobbes to the screen would be with animation. There have even been some excellent fan-made animated shorts which you can find on YouTube. Watterson himself has said that he's a great admirer of animated films, but he never wanted to give Calvin a voice, and he liked that the comic strip was all his own singular vision. If he were to license the characters for a film or television series, he would probably sit in meetings and hear all kinds of notes, suggestions, input, people trying to insert their own ideas into it, and requirements on how to structure the story. Reading his interviews, the whole idea of that seems very unappealing to him. What I respect about Bill Watterson is he's not a snob about this either. The impression I get from reading interviews is not some cranky shut-in who hates Hollywood and toys. He just likes his work a certain way and feels that a movie or toy, or even coffee mug with Calvin's face plastered on it, are different mediums altogether and would take away from the reader's own imagination. However, he said he does not begrudge other comic strip artists who do license their work to filmmakers and advertisers. He just has his own personal philosophy he sticks to, and I find that incredibly admirable. You could even be the best director in the world and he would still say no. Steven Spielberg once tried giving him a call but was rejected, and Jim Henson was apparently also interested at one point, I assume with the intention of Hobbes being depicted as a Muppet. Again, no dice. It would not even surprise me if Bill Watterson had it ironclad in his will that his estate was forbidden to sell the rights to any film production company or animation studio. It is interesting to think what a director might do with the material, including Richard Linklater, but we'll have to confine that to our own imaginations. Thank you for your question, Andrew.